So here's a little bit of an overview of Wicca, which is a modern recreation of witchcraft. And as you can see here on this page, we have a symbol for Wicca, which is a pentacle, which is a five-pointed star surrounded by a circle as a pentacle. And without the circle is a pentagram. Now, they represent the four elements of earth, air, fire, water, and then the fifth is spirit. All right, and these are sort of the key energies that one is working with in Wicca or witchcraft. And underneath here, you can see that, and these 8 words, this Wiccan read, fulfill, and harm ye none, do what ye will. And that is sort of a key ethic that has been adopted to direct any kind of magical activities or witchcraft, is if you harm no one, you can do what you will. And so there's a commitment to only using magic for good purposes. Okay. Yeah, and you see that written on this these creed on the right side. And that's also tied in with the idea of karma, that whatever you send forth comes back to you, okay, in the law of 3. All right, and this is something that always every Wiccan ritual ends with: "Merry ye meet and merry ye part," and they will meet again. Now, why is this? Okay, now we have a variety. Now, Wicca is contextualized within the larger topic of paganism. And there's a variety of paganism, various forms of paganism. And this is sort of reviving traditions, religious practices, beliefs, traditions prior to the world religions, basically. And so on the one hand, you have paleo-paganism, which hasn't been disrupted by any kind of civilization. So this is something you would find in among African tribes, for example, and also in Europe prior to the rise of Christianity. Then there's civilio-paganism, which is religious beliefs and practices tied in with more ancient societies. That's sort of a temple-based religion, like Egyptian religion, the Greco-Roman religion, Aztec, Mayan, etc. So they're really not tied to a world religion as such, but they also are in more advanced societies with urban centers. And there's usually a link between government and religion here in a more stratified, socially stratified society. Then we have Meso-Paganism. Here is where there's been an influence by a conquering culture on an indigenous tradition, where the indigenous tradition still maintains its independence, but there's been some influence through conquest. And this is quite typical. Usually what's categorized here are the First Nations traditions. Then Sincredo Paganism is where you have a blending of old and new, sort of a mix of more ancient pagan traditions with the influence of a dominating culture in terms of really adopting and incorporating elements of that other religion. And the classic one, of course, it would be Christianity. And so here's where you have Voodoo, Santeria, where you've got a blending of African-Cuban traditions with Catholicism. And then there's neo-paganism, and this is sort of what we're looking at here, is contemporary reinventions that are taking place. And Wicca is a key element of this. Goddess spirituality is very much tied in with Wicca. We'll talk about that a bit later. Then you have the revival of Druidism, okay, the Druid tradition of the Celts in Northern Europe or Britain specifically. And then the revival of shamanism, often referred to as neo-shamanism, because it's shamanism that's basically done by contemporaries, Westerners, not necessarily indigenous people, but outsiders are taking it up. And so paganism is basically a more encompassing category, a broader term that incorporates a lot of things. And there's just a little bit of a picture there on the right, where it's a broader category that includes within it Wicca, along with many other traditions like Druids. You can even think of it like we just went through a whole list there of even indigenous traditions of various kinds, like the First Nations spirituality, okay? And so Wicca is a specific group, and even in a sense, a bit of a sect within it, even though there's quite a diversity of different, again, there's all kinds of different traditions of Wicca with different emphases. So paganism is basically generally defined as a non-initiatory craft or practice. It doesn't entail that you have to get initiated in any kind of a way, but somebody is sort of incorporating more of these ancient indigenous traditions in one way or another, and it's really pretty fluid. The origins of the word pagan, it comes from the Latin word paganus, which meant country dweller. And so when Christianity was spreading throughout Europe, the Christian religion then became dominant in the city, urban centers. And then the outsider, people out in the country, you know, they were the last to take on Christianity. And so they then became referred to as the country dwellers who still held to the old traditions. And that's basically what the word pagan originally referred to. Okay. So they were those who were outside of the city who didn't adopt Christianity, but still held to the old traditions. And then the word witch, so to speak, or for Wicca has its origins, comes from the Saxon word for a male witch and a female witcha, witche, okay, for female and male witch. And Gerald Gardner is the one that adapted this term to create the term Wicca, to refer to a modern version of witchcraft that he believed had existed forever. It was a very ancient tradition. It was sort of like a universal religion that existed in Europe in an underground, secretive way, you know, as a result of the rise of Christianity, but yet it precedes Christianity. Okay, that is very, very, very ancient. And it's just the ancient pagan tradition. But he kind of is the one, and as you watch that one video I recommend, and as you'll see later, he is really often regarded as the father of modern day Wicca. Now, it's also called sometimes the craft, and that comes from a Masonic term in Masonry, or the Freemasons. They often refer to their tradition and practices as the craft. And excuse me. And so here you can see the influence of Western esotericism through the Masons coming into Wicca. Okay, there definitely is a connection here. Okay, thanks to Gerald Gardner. So basically here, to sum up as a definition, neo-paganism or modern-day witchcraft is a spiritual orientation that includes various rituals and traditions that have been reconstructed from primarily pre-Christian, ancient European, and Mediterranean sources. Okay, that is a lot of what Wicca draws from. It's very Western in the sense of drawing from European and Mediterranean sources, but pre-Christian. And as you see there, Satanism, we'll go through that a little bit. I think I do it in my Satanist video there, where some elements of what gets crossed over into Satanism, but they're not at all to be equated, that's for sure. So Margaret Murray, she was a key figure here in kind of triggering this whole search for reinventing and rediscovering this ancient pagan tradition. And you can see her dates there. She died in 1963. Her specialty was the study of the Egyptian religion. And she wrote in 1921 a book called The Witch Cult of Western Europe. And then that was followed by The God of the Witches. And her writing inspired this whole idea that there existed a very old religion. She called it the old religion, and it was universal, existed all over Europe, and it was an old religion of witchcraft that existed prior to the rise of Christianity. And that is what led then to the witch trials and the witch hunting that went on in the medieval period. And she claimed that it was basically a pretty organized, commonly held, widely spread religion. That has since been discredited. Okay, you know, there's a variety of pagan traditions, but they weren't at all linked. It wasn't cohesive. They weren't connected. You know, it's a far more complex, the picture here, as to what all existed in Europe prior to the rise of Christianity. So this is a bit of I don't know, I don't want to call it fabrication, but it was a bit of a hypothesis that really hasn't been justified and supported. But it inspired this idea and this vision and a desire for recreating this old religion of witchcraft. And so people in the late early 1900s really, you know, again, there were various esoteric occult societies. We saw there's the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, then there's the Order of the Golden Dawn, and many people were very interested in working with a more occult, esoteric tradition, something very spiritual that worked with magic, but again, was not a part of traditional Christianity or traditional religion. And so out of that interest, people started to dabble more and more in these sorts of things in terms of working with magic, magical rituals and practices, and kind of tapping into energies and powers to shift reality in various ways. And so this ended up being a bit of a peak interest here in the 1920s and 30s in Britain. All right. We find that at Cambridge University, there even was a Pentacle Club, just like you have student clubs today of various kinds, tied in with different religious traditions. They already existed way back then, okay? People who are interested in the occult and magic. Well, Gerald Gardner, he got involved in such circles and he had such interests. Now, let me just see here. I don't have more detail on him on the next slide. Now, he himself was involved in many things, fascinated by a lot of this stuff. He was connected with the Freemasons, with Alistair Crowley, which we'll see shortly, theosophy and spiritualism, and he was fascinated with magic and the occult. And he spent some time in India, and there he witnessed magical type of rituals, possession, trance states, various things, and found it all fascinating. And so when he came back to Britain, he got wind of a little group that became known as the New Forest Occultists that was led by this woman, Dorothy Clutterbuck, who claimed that she had been a witch and that she had inherited it from her family, that this was a tradition in the family that had been passed down. And so in 1939, Gardner got initiated into this particular group. And this is something that becomes key here with Wicca, is that people will form a group that becomes known as a coven, C-O-V-E-N, a coven, and you would get initiated, go through initiation ritual to become a part of this group. And it is rather secretive. They would meet secretly. It would be closed only to those who were members. And this is what he got involved with. And later on, after the passing of Dorothy, he became a leader himself as the high priest of the circle of the coven. And Doreen Valiente became the high priestess. And she also is an author of a number of books on Wicca. So someone who very much influenced Gardner was Alistair Crowley. And there you have his dates. He died in 1947. He was a ceremonial magician who made friends with Gardner and very much influenced him. And Gardner, for a while, had joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn along with Crowley. But Crowley literally got into a type of spiritual warfare with the leader in terms of, seeing who would become the leader of this group. But then he eventually left and started his own Ordo Templi Orientis. And this is where he then engaged in sexual rituals, calling in, powers in a circle to gain powers, believed he had a special connection with certain deities, if you like. And he did kind of have this vision, this idea that, he was the sort of inaugurating a dark age to come, and he got the title of being the beast. His mother was frightened of him, and he had a rather dark reputation, and ended up really getting into a lot of drugs, and spent the last years really losing his mind. But he defined magic, and this is where you find the word magic spelt with a K, to distinguish it from, a magical show of tricks, of illusion, creating illusions, making things disappear on stage, and that sort of thing, where it's just a lot of trickery that goes on, where people are creating visual illusions. Magic is where you're really doing the real thing. You are literally changing, shifting reality through working energy and working with these powers. And so he defined it as the science and art of creating change in conformity to will. Okay, and this has become a classic definition of magic within these circles. And he also taught that there is no God but man, and man has the right to live by his own law. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And from this, so Gardner is influenced by him in terms of some techniques and practices that he learned and working with magic. But then in bringing it into Wicca, some of this stuff, he then also modifies it. And he modified the last line that don't just do whatever you want, that is the whole of the law, but only do that does not harm anyone, okay? If you harm anyone, then you can do what you will. And so this is where that gets modified. And the key thing here, and just to make this point, Satanism and certain Satanists will also draw from Crowley, but they work with magic more on the dark side of things, generally speaking, okay? But he's often the key link between the two in terms of Satanism and then Wicca. Similar practices, tools, techniques, but the one will have no limits as to where that's used. It can be used for the dark side, whereas in Wicca, generally speaking, okay, not everybody agrees with this, but generally speaking, most hold you will only do what is good because of the law of karma. It will come back to you threefold. So you don't want to do any harm or do any evil with working magic. So Gardner, as the generally held to be the father of modern day Wicca, he combined the ceremonial high magic of Alistair Crowley with folklore low magic, authentic paganism, beliefs and practices in ancient Europe that were quite popular among the people, in terms of working with the sun and the moon and the seasons, fertility, healing, things like that. He ended up then integrating these things and produced 8 books of shadows over time. Now, a book of shadow is what witches, they developed the idea here, is that every witch, because of past persecution, what they would do is they would keep their own secret journal. And in this secret journal, they would write out different spells that they have done, different potions, magic potions and rituals, and then note any results, that they tried this and do that, and this worked, that didn't work, whatever. And it'd be their own personal spiritual journal of magical practice. But they kept it secretive, so they wouldn't be caught being a witch, because it would have been persecuted by the church there, okay, for a number of centuries. And then it even actually technically became outrightly illegal, okay. And so it was a secret book. That's why it's called the Book of Shadows. You keep it hidden in the shadow. So anyways, he produced about 8 of these, where in here you'll find various rituals. And through these, how he puts things together, you can see the evidence of how he integrated Crowley's work with folklore magic, etc. All right. What he also did is he built a museum to commemorate all the witches that were killed during the witch trials and witch hunting that went on in medieval Europe. And on the plaque there, he says that 9 million had been put to death. And that number has been reduced to 6 million. You'll find that written in a lot of books and even in a CBC production and whatnot. And it is not at all historically accurate in any kind of a way. He just pulled the number out of the air, all right? He just kind of, I don't know where he got the number from. But historians hold that's only a few 100,000, okay, that at the max that were put to death during the witch trials, okay, not at all those kind of numbers. Now, as I mentioned, witchcraft technically in Britain was officially illegal, and people had been charged with such things. Even in modern times, even in the 20th century, there were issues and people facing such charges. So Gardner had to be very careful in his writing and what he promoted and what he said and did publicly. So in 1949, he wrote a novel called High Magic's Aid. And hopefully that's not too loud, truck going by. High Magic's Aid. And in it, he put it all in a novel form as though it's just fiction. But basically, he's just describing Wicca in terms of rituals to be done and what witches did, etc. Well, then in 1951, the law changed and the witchcraft law was rescinded, and so no longer was illegal. And that's then when he published his Witchcraft Today in 1954, followed by The Meaning of Witchcraft in 1959. And it became quite the rave, quite the sensation. People reading it like crazy, wanting to get initiated into the craft. And his tradition then became known as the Gardnerian tradition, which really became quite foundational for a lot of Wicca. All right, highly, highly, highly influential. Well, then in the meantime, we have other things going on. This is, again, now we're getting into the 60s and the 70s, right, with the women's rights movement and whatnot going on. And so what we find happening is that Wicca then, that worships and gives honor to a goddess, a female deity in some form, became very appealing for a lot of women, especially in the women's movement and for feminism. And so here then it kicks off in often creating, sometimes it's called goddess spirituality, for those who just wanted to be devoted to a goddess and the divine in a feminine form and engage in practices tied into a goddess as opposed to a god, male god of some kind, right? So here a key figure that became very popular at the time is Z Budapest. Right. And she claimed to, being from Hungary, that she had inherited this pagan tradition in her family and that was familiar with this type of paganism, and started a women-only circle. Excuse me. Covens where only women were allowed, no men, and only the goddess would be worshipped and no male god. And excuse me. In classical Wicca, you will have both god and goddess worship, and men and women. You'll have mixed genders. But here she emphasized, nope, this is going to be for women only and goddess only. So sometimes it's referred to as Dianic Wicca. Okay. And, or sometimes for others, goddess spirituality. Depends on how, sectarian or rigid they want to be. This is where it's pretty loose. People are just sort of creating groups, creating movements. There's no one organization that is dictating who can do what and what's right and what's wrong. It's really quite open-ended here. People are experimenting and creating all kinds of groups here in this area. So she was highly active as a feminist, working at a women's center, and did various things. And even in 1975, she got arrested for reading tarot cards. So it was still, in a sense, potentially illegal here and could be charged with that. So she really worked hard to have Wicca acknowledged as a religion, and that there be that these sorts of practices of witchcraft, so to speak, would no longer be condemned, but seen as a legitimate religion, and that there be freedom of religion. Okay, and that it would be recognized by state authorities. And so she ended up winning over this and got acquitted and helped to establish the legitimacy, a legal legitimacy of this type of tradition. Then another person that's very popular, and also like here in our local area, we have, whoops, oh, what did I just do? Okay, let's go back here. There we go. Push the wrong spot. Is the figure of Starhawk. Okay, that's the name that she's taken on, but her name is Miriam Simoes. She was actually a Jew and Jewish by tradition and how she was raised. And she then got very much into this alternative spirituality. Was at this time, again, in the 70s, an activist, environmentalist, a feminist. And she politicizes Wicca even more so as a movement that's, attractive to a lot of social justice warriors and protesting anything that's in terms of capitalism, damaging to the environment, and very, very active on a political level. All right, protesting against the World Trade Organization that, again, was pretty intense some years ago. And so it attracts a lot of these sorts of people in the circle here, where it's seen as a spirituality for the modern world that includes all genders, transgenders, whatever, and also pro the environmentalist movement, climate emergency, any kind of injustice, social injustice. It attracts all of these sorts of things and kind of integrates it with this kind of social activism. Okay, so she's a big name. She's from San Francisco and very influential here on the West Coast. So what is all this Wicca stuff? Okay, that's just a little bit of an overview of some key figures here. Okay, there's many more. It's very complex, but just as a bit of an introduction here. First of all, it's decentralized. As a movement, there's no one organization running the show here, right? It's decentralized, it's very diverse. It's basically non-creedal. Like, it's really quite open-ended in terms of what you believe, but there are some basic ideas here, which we'll go through. The emphasis is more so on experience than it is on doctrines. And of course, on internal authority, individual autonomy, that it is your spirituality and you are on, you determine for yourself what's right and what's wrong. And it's all on your terms. All right. And this is what's so typical of spirituality today, is the sense of internal authority. It's a self-constructed, self-created kind of spirituality in terms of what works for you. And so it's highly pragmatic, you know, what you relate to, what works for you, what you want to do. It's all up to you. Right. And so with that, though, is personal responsibility. Right. You need to own it, and in terms of what you do, and be responsible for your life. It characterizes itself as being very life-affirming, fun-loving, and of course, nature-focused. So it's often held that traditional religion is so focused on denying this life, asceticism, renouncing the world, renouncing your desires, just going in a cave, meditating in the dark for, days on end, having no possessions, eating little food, no sex, being celibate, all these things. It's like, no. It's affirming life, that it's good to be physical. It's good to be sexual. And we're meant to enjoy the body. We're meant to enjoy this physical existence. And so, you're meant to dance and sing and have fun and go crazy and be free to express yourself. So it's fun loving. Okay. So this is sort of what gets emphasized here. And also that, this is key, is that it's all focused on being in tune with the cycles of nature, being in harmony with nature. And that's where that pagan element, because this is what you find in indigenous traditions all over the world, is that nature itself was seen as divine, as being spiritual, as sacred, that there's an intelligence and life in all of nature. And you need to be in harmony with that, in harmony with nature. That is always the key. And as religions evolve from there, the divine gets to be seen maybe as a God outside of nature and beyond nature. Then those become laws, and that you should obey the will of God and obey the laws of God. Whereas originally it's like, no, it's this life force energy in nature, and to be in harmony with it. Okay, that's kind of how it shifts later, right? That God is outside, beyond, who has written a book where these laws are written and you obey the laws. Whereas, before it's like, no, being in harmony with nature. Okay, again, that's how religion evolves here. So people would, here you could either be a solitaire witch, just doing your own thing in your own way, just by yourself. Okay, kind of create maybe your own little altar and do your own rituals, and and just do your thing. Or you could form groups known as covens and become a part of a group, and that usually, not always, but usually involves some form of initiation. Now, traditionally, classically, with, say, Gardner, for example, Gerald Gardner, there were 3 levels of initiation. That first of all, you get initiated into the coven and now are officially a witch. Okay, that's the first level, and then you're just a member of the group. Then the second initiation level is where you kind of move up to come to a place where you can lead a ritual for the whole group, for the coven. And then technically you're now a high priest or a high priestess. That's the second level of initiation. Then the third level of initiation, the highest level of initiation, is you now have the authority to go forth and start your own coven, okay, and then bring in new people and start your own circle, right, and break away that way. So those are basically the 3 levels. And then, of course, we've seen, what's very typical for most people here, they hold to reincarnation. That's a common belief here, that you come back. It's like the cycle of nature. Things are born and then they die. They're born and then they die. Spring to winter, spring to winter. So it is with human life. We're here this time, we will die, and we'll come back in another form. Okay, we reincarnate. And then the outworking of karma, the law of threefold return we already mentioned, and that you commit to doing good. Do not harm anyone, all right? You only work good magic. Those are basically the Wiccan laws. And then the key principles they work with are divine polarity, that the divinity exists as a duality of masculine and feminine, God and goddess. I'll go into that in a bit here. Secondly, divine immanence, that divinity is in all that is. All of life has the divine presence in it. Okay. The divine, i.e. God, goddess, is here in all of life. All right. That's the key thing that gets emphasized as well. So you've got divine immanence along with divine polarity. Thirdly, that the earth and nature itself is sacred. The earth is our mother is a common theme. And that it's spiritual, it's holy, it's sacred, and we need to respect and honor that. Right? Not exploit it. This is why, again, it's so appealing to the people of the 60s with all the social activism. Fourth, that we all have these superpowers, psychic powers, ESP, extrasensory perception. Yeah, I should really capitalize that. Extrasensory perception, that is possible for us to know things, see things that transcend the usual physical limitations. Divination techniques are used all the time to see the future, know the future, follow your intuition, know how to work with your intuition, right? So you, healing energy, working with energies, that's going to be key stuff here in Wicca. And then fifthly is the working of magic, just knowing how to do magical rituals to literally shift, cause change in conformity with will, okay? To the working and practicing of magic. 6 is a belief in reincarnation, it's quite widespread. And that 7, that sex is sacred. And in fact, that for some traditions, and with Gardner held that a part of initiation could entail that the god and goddess is like Tantra. Tantra comes in. This is what Crowley did. Crowley really got into tantric kind of practices, but also on a homosexual level. But that the union of the male and female, god and goddess, all right, that sexual act is a key thing that can be involved sometimes in initiation rituals. And that sex is sacred. It's a union of the male and female, masculine, feminine, and that is what gives birth to all of life. And that is a holy ritual. Now, the concept of God here, in here to see some images, was very typical in terms of the masculine conception of divinity, is often referred to God as the horned one, the Lord of the hunt, is associated with the forest, with nature, with animals, all right, as you can kind of see in the picture on the right. And here is a bit of a prayer. Somebody had composed a prayer to the old one, to the Lord of the hunt, to the wild, dancing, mischievous masculine, he who's born in winter and dies with the leaves. Okay, to the soul guide and pathfinder, Sononis. And here, this is where they'll draw from more ancient Greco-Roman deities, where the god Pan, P-A-N, Pan, sort of the legs of a goat, half human, half goat kind of an image is popular. And that's kind of then what gets picked up a little bit by Satanism as a type of image. And with having horns on the head, is this kind of imagery that is associated largely with the male god, okay, as being with the forest, with the animals, having horns. And what I find so interesting, and I think I have this on the next slide, don't I? Yeah. As you see on the left here at the bottom, these are classic images you find in ancient India of the prototype for Shiva, or it's over on the top right there. That's from India, going way back to the Indus Valley civilization, the very beginnings of civilization in India, about 3000 BC or 2700, 3000 BC, where you have the horned one surrounded by the animals. Okay, and that is what's going to evolve into the god Shiva over in Hinduism. And yet this is something very ancient, even in Europe, European paganism. And so here on the left, you'll see all kinds of imagery of kind of the idea of the horned god. Yeah, there is where you'll see Pan. He's on the right side, like hairy goat legs with horns on his head, sitting down, right? Big, very muscular. He's sort of in the middle to the right. That's the god Pan, okay? But there are various images, as you'll see, throughout history and time, going even back into shamanic cave art. You know, it's interesting. And I suspect for the men going hunting, you know, they would shapeshift to become the animal, to come into union with that animal spirit of the animal they'd be hunting. That there's some kind of a link there, more so than it would be for women, because it's the men who would be doing the hunting. And so they would call in on spiritual forces and powers to empower them in the hunt in some way. And that probably is what's behind these very ancient links that we get. Okay. And so there's another one of the oak tree. The oak tree is held to be very sacred in the, again, this Northern European pagan traditions where this really comes through. Okay. And that the masculine deity is associated again with the forest and the animals. Is the masculine god. And then on the feminine side, in terms of goddess imagery, you know, you generally have here imagery of a woman at the height of pregnancy about to give birth. And these are all various goddess figurines that we find throughout the world in various traditions. And then some of them are associated with here, a lioness. This is a Roman deity associated with lions. You'll find that. That's interesting. You'll have that in India, like Durga, the goddess Durga, you know, that they're goddesses of power. But what gets really popular in Wicca is this idea of the goddess in three forms, the tripartite goddess. And this is something that, you know, is generally it's held that it's a bit of a creation by the author Robert Graves in his book, The White Goddess. This is historical fiction, this book that he wrote, where he basically rediscovers or explores the pagan traditions in Greco-Roman times. And in that, he develops this idea that they viewed the goddess in three forms like this. But yet, outside of Graves, we really don't have solid evidence for this, right? But it gets picked up in Wicca, and it is widely used and referred to, and it's become very popular. And the goddess, and that's, yeah, one thing I didn't mention, with the male god, he's usually associated with the sun. Okay, the sun, and the goddess is associated with the moon. And here, the goddess goes through the phases of womanhood, as women do. That first of all, the woman is a virgin, she's a maiden, and here she's associated with a waxing moon, you know, when the moon is just beginning to kind of grow. It goes from a new moon to waxing, and is growing to eventually become a full moon. And at the level of full moon is where she's no longer a virgin, but now she's a mother. She's pregnant, about to give birth. Okay, and there you'll see on the right, like on the left is the maiden, the full moon is in the middle with a big belly, and then to the right is the crone or the hag. When the moon is waning, it's going, shrinking down from a full moon to become back into a new moon. That is where a woman is past menopause and can no longer get pregnant or give birth. And so these are a woman's life cycle, okay, going from virgin to motherhood to menopause and beyond that. And so she's waning, she's losing her life, she's gonna, yeah, eventually die, right? So these are the three forms of the goddess, and this is what will be worked with in ritual. Okay. And so, as you see, first of all, that line at the bottom, Wicca is a religion that's based on the cycles in nature, very much tied to the movements of the sun and the moon. And so the various gatherings that would take place would fit in with the sun and the moon, as well as the type of rituals that are done would fit in with the sun and the moon. So that the rituals and the gatherings are kind of done in line with the movements of nature. All right, this is the key thing about it. And this is what you find. This is what you find in the ancient religious traditions, prior to the world religions. All religious rituals were done this way. They were all in sync with the movement of nature, very much tied in with that. Okay, and working with the energy that is at play at those different seasons and times. So it's held that as the moon is going from waxing, like being small, to becoming a full moon and then shrinking in the waning again, you would do rituals that would correlate with that. So if you want something to grow, say you want your money to grow, okay, well then you would do a ritual of increase, financial increase, when the moon is waxing. Okay. Now, if you want to get rid of something, if you want to get rid of an illness or get rid of some bad things going on in your life, you would do it when the moon is waning, a ritual of decrease at that time. Okay. And generally speaking, at a time of a full moon is when you would do divination, where you would get vision. You would be able to see what's going on. This is when you would do some aspect of scrying or divination techniques, generally speaking. Okay? So you basically kind of do certain kinds of rituals according to where the moon's at. And so depending on the people, but generally a coven would probably meet once a week, where they would get together and do some kind of ritual, all right, for a more personal ritual of what people might need, all right. And then, so that's generally what would happen, is those weekly gatherings is more personal for the people involved in that coven. Then outside of that, there are 8 major gatherings that are more communal for the larger community at large, where maybe larger groups would get together. And these are called esbats, where they are tied in with the movements of the sun. Okay, sorry, no, the 8 sabbats are the sun. Esbats are with the moon. So when the sun is going through its movement, and I think I have it on the next slide here of that, there are larger communal gatherings where people celebrate the changes of the seasons. And here the rituals are done more for the larger community. It's not so much personal rituals for me as an individual, but for the whole community. Okay. And this makes up the wheel of the year, these 8 sabbats, or the 4, yeah. Well, there's 8 of them altogether, the lesser and greater ones. Okay. And so they're tied in with the solstices and the equinoxes. So you can see here in the Wiccan New Year, the New Year begins on October 31st at what's called Samhain. Okay, October 31st, and what we call Halloween, right? And that marks the beginning of the new year, because this is sort of it's an in-between time. It's in between summer and winter. You know, summer is just coming to an end and winter is about to start, but it's in between those 2 realms. And it's that in between time when they often say you're between the worlds, all right? That is when the veil, the wall that separates the material from the spiritual is the thinnest. And that's when it's the easiest for spirits to come through. And that's when the spirits easily come through, and you can more easily contact the dead in some way, all right? And so this is what's going to lead to what Halloween is all about. And you'll find this tradition in many places, is honoring the dead on this day. And this is the day when, because the separation between this world and the other world, the spiritual world, is thinnest, that spirits can show up. And so you want to make sure you've honored your dead ancestors. You give them food, you remember them, and you make them happy, i.e. you give them treats. And if you don't do that, they'll become, just like we see in China, they'll become hungry ghosts, right? And they'll trick you, right? That's why they call it trick or treat, right? They dress up as spirits and goblins and whatnot. And that's the whole point of Halloween. It has its origins here in very ancient pagan traditions. And so this is the idea, is that this is a time when the separation between this world and the other is the thinnest, and you've got this special connection going on. It's also a good time to really see into the future as well, okay, because you're not so blocked into the future and that. And so it's a time when you remember all those who have died and you celebrate all those who have been born. Okay, so it's a transition then from one year to the next, birth and death, You remember those who have died. You remember those who are born. You're bringing one year to an end, beginning of a new year. Summer's come to an end. Winter's about to begin. It's like a time of transition. Okay, this is key. It's the most important day of the year. Okay, in the Wiccan tradition. Okay, and then you go into, as you can see there, at what we usually celebrate as Christmas. Yule in December is tied in with the winter solstice. And this is a time where it's the darkest night of the year. It's the shortest, no, the longest night of the year. Okay, and this is at the peak of winter, right? Where it's like you're now here at a turning point, and there it's about 3 days of a turning point, where we've gone into this darkness for about 3 days, and then it's going to start changing where, well, no, the days will start to get longer and the sun will start to get stronger. And so it's held here that we have the total completion of the death of the sun, and the sun will be reborn, okay, will come back into life after this. So this is a time of important transition for the sun, from death to life of the sun. Because again, this is largely based in Northern Europe, right? Anyways, I know on it goes. So then you've got, what we usually associate with Groundhog's Day at February 1st, is held that now things really will quicken and speed up in terms of the sun getting stronger, right? So then there's going to be more of a focus on the coming of spring and fertility. And then you'll have the spring equinox, Austera, associated with Easter. That's where we get the word Easter from, is from goddesses of fertility called, Austera. And then there's various related names like that tied in with Easter. That's where you get Easter from. And with it, fertility, Easter eggs, because rabbits are very fertile. And so we've got this to find eggs, collecting eggs, and all that is a symbol of fertility to celebrate the coming of spring. Okay. And then Beltane, May 1st, it's like, oh, this is at the peak where you celebrate the union of the male and the female. And then you'll have like May Day, where you'll put up these big poles, like in European traditions, large poles that represents a phallic symbol, okay, like an erected penis that you would dance around celebrating fertility. There'll be rituals done on the land to ensure the fertility of the land in terms of, who knows what all will go on there, all right? But there'll be various rituals being done here to celebrate the fertility of the land and the coming into life, okay? And anyway, so this is sort of to give you a bit of an idea. And then the summer solstice is a celebration of the peak of that. And there you go. So there'll be celebrations all around here. These are larger communal ones, larger gatherings of the people to celebrate the movement of the seasons, because it has impact on the whole community as opposed to just individuals. So these are the great 8 gatherings. So for tools in the Wiccan altar, this is, generally what you would find here, okay, is you'd have the symbol of the pentacle, all right, as you can see there, the circle with the 5-pointed star in some way. That often is seen as a symbol here of the earth. You'll have a knife or a theme, which represents fire or air, but also represents the male god, the masculine god, because it's like a phallic symbol, or like an erected penis phallus symbol, right? Then you have either a wand or a bell that you could ring that represents air, generally speaking. And again, people will adapt these in various ways. A chalice, some kind of a container, like you can see there, the cup, the silver cup, a chalice that contains water that also represents the goddess. And that's where you could put the knife into the cup. It's like putting the penis into the vagina, right? That's sort of the idea there, the symbolism involved of the male and masculine and feminine coming into union. Also, you could have a candle that would represent fire, or some crystal or minerals or salt for earth, a feather or a bell for air, as I mentioned, and of course water. So you have the elements present in one way or another, and then also these implements. Okay. But always key are the 4 elements, to have the 4 elements, because they represent key energies in nature. And so the ritual always kind of has a flow, that a process that you would go through. It always begins with an act of purification, either through the use of water or some form of smudging. So smudging is when you would take maybe some sage, a certain kind of plant herb that you would set on fire, and the smoke from it is meant that you would kind of have it go all over your body, and it clears out any kind of negative energy around you in your energy field. Okay, so an act of purification. And then people would come into a place where they're going to have their gathering, and they gather there and they start to get grounded. They just do a bit of a meditation of getting grounded, being fully present and fully being there and focused. Then you have an official casting of the circle, creating the sacred space. So somebody would go around using the wand or the knife, the athame, going around in a circle, and they would say that I am now creating the sacred space. That all the energy would be contained in the circle, that they'd be protected from any kind of evil intrusions, but this becomes now the sacred space. And it's taken very literally, so that if you are in the circle and you want to leave the circle, because the sacred circle is created around, behind all the people who are in the circle, okay? So you are inside of this holy circle. And that you are now creating an opening in the circle between this world and the other world. You're creating kind of a link, a portal, a connection between this world and the spiritual world. Okay, so if you're going to leave, you then kind of would unzip it, like it's spiritual, it's invisible. You would kind of unzip it and open the door and step through to outside of the circle, and then you close it behind you, right? If you do this before it's all done, right? If you just wanted to leave the circle for, I don't know, going to the washroom or something, right? So anyway, so it's taken very literally, right? And this is one thing too that's different in Satanist circles, generally speaking, okay? And you know, people working really dark magic and trying to conjure up evil spirits, you know, they will create a circle, but the circle is one where they call on the spirit to come into that circle, and the magician stands outside of the circle, and that circle is meant to contain that spirit that they're conjuring up, so that it's confined into that circle so they can control the spirit. Okay, so the magician there then is outside of that circle in certain forms of ceremonial magic or the dark arts. Okay, they do that to protect the magician and to gain control over the spirit. Whereas here it's held. You're only going to call in good spirits, so they don't have to, you know, they're not worried about this. Let me boy, my voice goes. Okay, so after doing that, you then invoke the 4 directions and the 4 elements. So earth, air, fire, water are each associated with a certain direction of north, south, west, east. And so you then, after the circle is created, you would go to, usually you begin with the east, and you call upon, you know, the guardian of the east, and that represents air, that represents the intellect and inspiration, and invite that spirit to be present. And then you would maybe go to the south and then call upon the element of fire and the guardian of the south. And you ask that the spirit of fire come and bring passion and strength and action and whatever else associated with fire. Then you go to the west and call in the guardian of the west and the element of water that brings healing and depth of understanding and whatever else, okay? Then you go to the north and call in the guardian of the north, which represents earth. And sometimes different traditions will have animals associated with them. This is where you'll find an indigenous tradition. They'll have things like eagle, bear, salmon, whatever, different animals associated with them as well, okay? But and again, it's sort of optional. People will adapt and tweak it the way they want to. Okay. So you call in each of the 4 elements in the 4 directions, and invite them to be present, to bring in their energies, their powers, to assist in this circle gathering. Then you'd usually would have a male and a female, one representing the goddess and the god, well, will be, and being the high priest and high priestess. And they then would call upon the goddess to come into the high priestess, the god call to invoke and bring into the male, into the priest. And here is where they will, call upon any deity that they want to draw the particular energy from. So, different deities have different powers, energies, strengths associated with them. So depending on what the focus of the ritual might be, they would call on certain particular deities in order to gain that kind of energy that they're surrounded with. And the one that I always like, because I don't know, because I know it so well, is Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and success in India. Even though generally here they don't generally bring in too many Indian deities, are more Western. But say if you wanted more wealth and success, you'd call in Lakshmi as the goddess. Okay, so you want to again tie in with that particular energy of that deity. Okay, that's who you would call in and invite them to be present here in this ritual. Then you would conduct the ritual, and again, they'll have various purposes and needs in terms of what the goal is. If it's for healing, if it's for success, if it's for empowerment in some issue, whatever people might need or want to do, they will conduct some type of ritual that would involve working with symbolic elements of various kinds, particular colors, particular objects, particular prayers and invocations, all right, that they would kind of do various things here. There would be an intention, though, a focus, an intention that's created here. Then usually they would end with doing a bit of a chant with maybe somebody on a drum or a bit of music or something, but by chanting and dancing. But by dancing, it's usually like a line dance or going around in a circle, holding hands and doing sort of what's called the grapevine kind of move, stepping a certain way and then chanting something over and over again and having a focus of intention. The consciousness, you're focusing your mind on the goal of this ritual, what you want to see happen here from this ritual. And as you do, you're going in a circle and you say it louder and you're dancing harder, you're moving harder, you're putting your energy into it, right? And it's called you're raising the cone of power. You're raising the energy here through this. It's all about working with energy. And then you set it free, you set it loose out there to do its work. And you just let it go. Okay, kind of ideally in a way build it up to a bit of a frenzy. All right, it has to be intense. Again, we're so accustomed to a highly domesticated religion, and it's the intensity of emotion, right? To really feel it, to really speak it, to yell it out, to move it in your body is that intensity. Raising energy is what it's all about. That's what makes this work. Right? That's what people don't realize. They're so inhibited, they don't do anything, and so nothing happens. But this is a key thing, okay, is releasing that. Now I have to say also, this could be done sky-clad, okay, to use that term, without clothing. It's held that clothing blocks the energy in the body. It kind of contains it more. But when people are coming into circle, and if they're naked, it will even raise more energy. There's more energy raised by doing these rituals without clothing. Okay, so some people will do that. Okay. And Gardner did, all right? In fact, yeah, if you watch that movie, you'll see that we're kind of a bit of a nudist group there. Just hanging out in the nude is a key thing. Anyway, then after you've released this cone of power, it's like, oh, the energy's been raised. And now you got to get grounded. You got to get grounded again, because otherwise you'll be buzzing. And so you need to get grounded and let that energy kind of come out of you and kind of let it go and get grounded again. So, there'd be a bit of a meditation. You literally could just lay on the ground, touching the ground, just getting grounded. And then usually they'll pretty much, they do it pretty much always, I guess, have some food, have something to eat and drink after, because that also helps in the grounding of things. And this is part of the ritual, is the feasting. You're meant to feast. Well, then at the end, you kind of now close the circle. And how you do it, you undo what you've done. So you first of all ask the goddess and god to leave, thank them for being present, for giving their energy to this ritual, and you bid them farewell. Okay, you say thank you, and you bid them farewell, and that they are to be removed. You know, you ask them to, okay, you can now leave me. Okay, if you're high priest and high priest, you leave me. All right. And then the same thing with the four directions. You kind of reverse everything, beginning with the earth in the north, and thank each of the four directions. Thank you, guardian of the north, you know, for granting us this and that, and we bid you now farewell. And then you go all the way around to the four elements, and then you undo the circle. You kind of just reverse it by undoing it, and it's now open. Okay, so that's a basic flow and format of a Wiccan ritual. Okay, and as I mentioned, it's all about working the energy that's in you, your own personal power, the energy in your body of who you all are. Okay, your energy is the key thing. And being sky clad, as I mentioned earlier, naked is the most effective in terms of working with energy. So that's one energy, is you. The second energy is divinity, the divine. Calling upon goddess and God. Here they work a lot with archetypes. These are archetypal energies you're accessing. This is where it's very similar to shamanism. In shaman, you're working with power animals. Those animals are archetypal energies that you're tapping into, that you're working with. Okay? And I'll talk more about that in shamanism. So that's the second key source of energy. So you yourself, the divine, actual spiritual forces and beings out there. And number three, the energy in the earth, the energy of the four elements. That nature is full of energy, and you're working with the energy in nature, okay, in the elements. All right, that's the third thing. And the fourth is the energy in words, that there is power in words, in incantation, speaking forth, declaring and decreeing, giving words of command is key. And then with it, the power of the mind, right? And that should really be number five, the power of the mind in terms of your intention, what you visualize, what you imagine, focusing the mind, right? That all comes into play here in the working of magic, right? And so the energy that that is raised from the elements and divinity and through you is being directed and released out into the world. And then any excess energy is brought back to the earth through grounding. That's a basic flow of how that works. Okay, and so those are some videos to watch. And there you go. I think I'm pretty much done here to give you a bit of an introduction to Wicca.